Poor Maid shielded the Mafia boss's mother from a slap. The revenge that followed was unbelievable. The city always whispered at night. Its narrow streets, lit by flickering lanterns, were alive with shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the walls. In this city, the powerful ruled not through laws, but through fear, loyalty, and secrets that could kill a family or make one immortal in reputation. Among these rulers, none were more feared than the Deathrin family. Their name alone made merchants clutch their purses, nobles bow slightly lower, and even other gangs step carefully in their presence. And yet, on one ordinary evening in the grand estate at the heart of the city, a small, quiet maid changed the course of destiny in a single heartbeat. Leora moved through the polished halls of the Deathrin estate, carrying a tray of tea for Madame Seraphine, the elegant matriarch of the family. Her steps were careful, almost too quiet, but years of working unnoticed had made her a shadow in her own right. She did not belong to this world of power, gold, and whispered curses. She was small, with worn hands and careful eyes, and she understood the delicate balance of servitude and survival. The day had been ordinary until the door to the ballroom opened with a sudden force. A young nobleman, known for his arrogance and thinly veiled cruelty, stepped inside, laughing as he leaned toward Madame Seraphine. "I see even the Deathrin matriarch is not above disgrace," he sneered. Seraphine, with her grace and quiet authority, met his gaze calmly, but the man's pride demanded a show. His hand lifted suddenly, poised to strike her across the face. Gasps rippled through the assembled guests, frozen in shock at the audacity of such an attack. Leora, standing a step behind her mistress, felt her heart leap into her throat. She could not explain why her body acted before her mind did. She stepped forward in a blur of motion, placing herself between the nobleman's hand and Madame Seraphine. "Stop!" she cried, her voice shaking, though fierce with instinct. Her small frame could not block the man completely, but it was enough to make him hesitate, and in that pause, Seraphine moved backward, avoiding humiliation by inches. The nobleman's eyes widened in shock. "No one dared interfere in the affairs of the Deathrins, not even the lowliest servant." Leora felt the weight of the entire ballroom pressing down on her shoulders. She was terrified, but she could not step back. From the shadows near the tall windows, Eldrick Deathrin watched. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm, yet his chest tightened with an emotion he had rarely felt. Fascination. The infamous Mafia heir, known across the city for his coldness and ruthlessness, felt a flicker of something unfamiliar when he saw Leora standing so fearlessly before his mother. The nobleman, realizing he was being defied, stepped back with a scowl. He left, muttering threats under his breath, but the damage, or perhaps the miracle, had been done. Leora, trembling, glanced at Madame Seraphine, expecting anger. Instead, Seraphine's eyes softened with gratitude and a hint of admiration. "You are brave," she said quietly. "Few would dare do what you did." Leora bowed her head, unwilling to meet the gaze of someone so powerful. I only wanted to protect you, madam," she whispered. Seraphine reached out and touched Leora's shoulder gently. "You may have saved more than my face today. Remember that courage does not go unnoticed." But as the night wore on, Leora realized that her action had consequences she could not yet see. Whispers spread among the servants and nobles alike. Some admired her courage, but others feared it. Word traveled swiftly in the city. A maid had dared to defend the Deathrin matriarch. The streets outside the grand estate would soon be buzzing with talk, and the rival families would not forget. Later that evening, Eldrick appeared in the grand hall. He moved with a predator's grace, the long shadows of the chandeliers falling across his face. Leora felt her pulse quicken as he stopped before her, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You have a curious sense of timing, boldness, and foolishness." Leora's heart hammered. "I did what I had to do," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She is important." Eldrick tilted his head, as if weighing her soul with a glance. He noticed the tremble in her hands, the tightness in her posture. Yet he also saw something else, a spark that defied fear. You are either very brave or very foolish, perhaps both. Leora lowered her eyes, sensing the danger in his words. Eldritch Deathrin could destroy her with a gesture. The entire city knew it. And yet, in the depths of his dark gaze, she saw a question, a curiosity, and perhaps even admiration buried beneath the usual cold cruelty he wore like armor. Days passed, and Leora found herself under a quiet scrutiny she could neither ignore nor understand. Eldritch would appear unexpectedly, watching her from a distance, silent but observing. His presence made the air in the halls tense, thick with unspoken words. The other servants whispered among themselves, unsure if this was protection or a threat. Meanwhile, Madame Seraphine found excuses to spend time with Leora, quietly teaching her about the unspoken rules of the estate and the fragile power that kept everyone alive. In this house, Seraphine said softly, fear rules most hearts, but courage changes fates. Remember, girl, you have touched a destiny that few ever touch knowingly. Leora listened, her heart swelling with both pride and fear. She did not yet understand the weight of her actions, nor the storm they would bring. She only knew that she could not go back to being invisible, not after standing in the path of danger for another. And then, one night, it happened. The estate was quiet, the moon high and cold above the city. Leora was returning from the kitchens with a tray of tea when a shadow moved across the hall. A figure she did not recognize stepped out, a masked intruder, swift and silent. Before she could react, the intruder lunged toward her. Leora's instinct screamed. She moved, barely dodging, and in the chaos, the tray of tea slipped from her hands, shattering across the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the still night. Eldritch appeared from the shadows, his presence sudden and commanding. With a motion both precise and terrifying, he disarmed the intruder and held him at bay. The masked figure fell to the floor, bound by invisible restraints that shimmered with a strange, almost magical light. You are safe, Eldritch said to Leora, his voice low, almost a whisper. But do not mistake safety for control. You have stepped into a world where every action is measured and every choice has consequences. Leora, shaken but unharmed, could only nod. She realized then that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a maid. She was part of a story that had begun long before her birth, tied to the fate of a family ruled by shadows, power, and secrets too heavy for most to bear. That night, as she lay in the small attic room she called her own, Leora could not sleep. The events of the past days replayed endlessly in her mind. The nobleman's hand raised, her instinct to shield Madame Seraphine, the silent, intense gaze of Eldritch Deathrin. Something about him both terrified and drew her in, though she did not yet understand why. And in the quiet of the night she heard a whisper, carried on the wind that seeped through the shutters. Courage will be tested, loyalty will be demanded, and hearts will be changed. Leora closed her eyes, gripping the edge of her blanket. She could not know what tomorrow would bring. She could not know if she would survive it, or if the choices she had made would lead to ruin or redemption. But she understood one thing with absolute clarity. She had stepped into a world far larger, far darker, and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And there was no turning back. Outside, the city slept under the watchful gaze of the moon, and somewhere in the heart of the estate, Eldritch Deathrin contemplated the small, fearless maid who had dared to challenge fate itself. He did not yet know the role she would play in his life, or the impossible choices that awaited them both. But one thing was certain, the story had begun, and neither of them would remain unchanged. The morning sun rose over the city like a pale promise, brushing the spires of the Deathrin estate with gold. Yet inside the grand halls, the air was thick with unease. Leora moved carefully, her small hands clutching the tray she carried, though her mind was elsewhere. The letter had arrived in the dead of night, sealed with the insignia of the rival family, the Corsairs. Its words were simple but sharp. Interfere and pay the cost. Fear and curiosity twisted in her chest. She had acted to protect Madame Seraphine, yet this one brave choice now carried the weight of unseen threats. Somewhere, enemies were plotting, and Leora's courage had drawn their attention. Eldrick Dethrin appeared without warning. He stepped from the shadows of the corridor, his dark cloak brushing the floor, eyes burning with unreadable fire. Leora froze, caught between relief and anxiety. "You've received the warning," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Good! It means they know we are aware."
Yes, Leora stammered, unsure what to say.
"I don't understand why they would." Eldrick cut her off with a gesture. "Understanding is not necessary right now." Survival is. He led her through the halls to a small chamber hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, a place few servants had ever entered. Inside, the walls were lined with portraits of the Dethrian ancestors, faces stern, almost lifelike, and a single candle flickered in the corner. Eldrick gestured for Leora to sit, though he remained standing, a figure of dark command. "The city believes we are untouchable," he said, eyes scanning the room as if the shadows themselves might betray secrets. "They do not know the cost of defiance. And you, little maid, you have just stepped into a world of storms you cannot yet see." "I only wanted to protect Madame Seraphine. I never thought—" "You never think," he interrupted, his voice sharper now, though not unkind. "That is the difference between those who survive and those who are lost. Courage without caution can be deadly. But you have something different, something that even I did not expect." Her heart skipped a beat. Something in his gaze, dangerous, relentless, made her pulse race. It was not kindness, not exactly, but it was attention, and attention from Eldrick Dethrin was a force stronger than fear itself. For the next several days, Leora's life shifted in ways she could not have imagined. Eldrick observed her constantly, yet never with cruelty. He tested her without words, placing her in situations where quick thinking, calmness, and courage mattered more than obedience. When a vase teetered precariously from the grand staircase, Leora saved a visiting noble's child from a fall. Eldrick appeared silently beside her, catching the vase before it shattered. His hand brushed hers, accidental yet electric. Neither spoke, but a tension lingered between them, thick and undeniable. "You are fortunate," he said finally, eyes cold yet intense. "Luck follows the brave, but courage follows only those who choose it despite fear." Leora wanted to speak, to ask why he watched her so closely, but words failed her. She felt like a small flame against the dark walls of his presence, fragile yet stubbornly burning. Meanwhile, Madame Seraphine remained quietly watchful, as if sensing the invisible threads of danger weaving around Leora. One evening, she led the young maid into her private library, a room heavy with leather-bound books and scrolls smelling of dust and secrets. "Courage alone does not save a person in this world," Seraphine said gently, "but insight and loyalty can." "You have shown courage, yes, but do not mistake bravery for wisdom. That comes later." Leora nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. There was so much she did not understand. Yet in that moment she realized that Seraphine's trust was not easily earned, and having it felt like a quiet, impossible gift. As night fell, the first real threat arrived. A masked figure, different from the one Leora had seen before, slipped into the estate. This intruder moved silently, shadows clinging to him like a second skin. Leora was alone in the corridor, carrying a candle when she noticed the slight movement at the corner of her eye. Before she could react, the figure lunged. Her instincts took over and she dodged, almost stumbling, the candle flickering wildly. But she had no weapon, no strength to resist. Suddenly, Eldrick appeared, as if summoned by the very tension in the air. He moved faster than a human should, a shadow among shadows, and disarmed the intruder with a single fluid motion. The masked figure fell to the floor, caught in an invisible restraint that shimmered with a strange, almost magical glow. "You are lucky," Eldrick said, standing over Leora. His chest rose and fell with calm precision, but his eyes bore into her as if measuring every heartbeat. "Luck and courage are not always enough. You must learn to trust in guidance as well." Leora's hand shook. "I didn't," she began, but he silenced her with a raised finger. "I know," he said softly. "You acted without thinking, and that is why you survived. Remember this, Leora. The world outside these walls does not forgive mistakes. Inside, I might." That night, sleep was impossible. Leora lay on her small mattress in the attic, mind racing. The city seemed quieter, but she knew danger had not left. Somewhere, enemies were plotting, and every shadow outside the estate was a reminder that her actions had consequences beyond her understanding. Eldrick did not leave her thoughts either. His presence, even in memory, was a storm she could neither flee nor embrace fully. There was something magnetic about him, something dark, dangerous, and alive. She both feared and felt drawn to him, though she could not name why. Days later, Seraphine approached her with a delicate smile. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "But even strength can be twisted into chains if one does not understand the weight it carries. Be cautious, Leora. You have attracted attention."
"Yes, madam," Leora replied softly, though her mind was already racing ahead. She had no choice but to understand.
She had stepped into a world she could not leave, a story that had begun long before she was born. And then came the whisper of a curse. It was subtle at first, a chill in the air, the flicker of shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should, a voice that hummed faintly in the corners of her mind. Eldrick noticed it too. One evening he paused in the hall, hand resting against the cold stone, his expression dark. "There is an old bloodline in this city," he said quietly. "Powerful, dangerous, and cursed. My family is tied to it. That is why your act of courage has not gone unnoticed." "Cursed?" Leora asked, shivering despite the warmth of the hall. "Yes," he said, turning to face her fully. "The Dethrins survive not just by power, but by the vigilance and courage of those we trust. That trust is rare, and you have earned it, though perhaps not fully intentionally." The words made her stomach twist. She was no one, just a maid, yet Eldrick's gaze carried the weight of a man who had seen too much, lived too long in shadows, and yet felt something like admiration for her small, fearless heart. In the following days, Leora's role changed. She became more than a maid. She became an observer, a student of the dangerous balance that held the estate together. She watched Eldrick interact with family, allies, and enemies alike. She noticed the subtle gestures, the unspoken commands, and the quiet moments when he allowed a glimpse of vulnerability to shine through. She realized something else as well. She was not invisible to him anymore. Every glance, every challenge, every quiet instruction carried a weight she could not ignore. It was intoxicating and frightening, and it left her heart beating in ways she had never known. Then, one night, the threat made itself clear. A messenger arrived at the estate, breathless and panicked. "They know!" he said. "The Corsairs. They are planning something. Soon." Eldrick's expression hardened. He placed a hand on Leora's shoulder, firm yet protective. "You have chosen courage," he said. "Now you will learn caution. They will test you, test all of us, and you will either rise or be broken." Leora nodded, determination shining through her fear. She had already survived more than she thought possible. She would not run. She would not hide. She had stepped into this world willingly, and now she would face its storms head on. That night, as the moon rose over the city, Eldrick and Leora stood on the balcony looking down at the streets where shadows moved like living things. Neither spoke, but the silence was filled with understanding. A storm was coming, a storm born of revenge, power, and old curses. And together, whether they realized it or not, they would face it. The city never slept, though its lights flickered as if exhausted by the weight of its own shadows. The streets hummed with whispers, rumors of danger, tales of courage, and threats from families whose names carried both fear and history. For Leora, each whisper now felt like it brushed against her skin, reminding her that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a maid. She had become part of the Dethrine world, a small spark in the dark corridors of power. That evening, the estate was unusually quiet. The great hall, usually buzzing with servants and guards, held only faint echoes of footsteps. Leora carried a candle down the corridor, her heart quickening with each soft creak of the polished floors. Something was coming. She could feel it in the air, the subtle shift in the way shadows pooled in corners, the cold ripple that passed across the walls. Eldrick appeared silently behind her, as always. His presence was both a shield and a storm, steadying and overwhelming all at once. "They are close," he said quietly, his dark eyes scanning the horizon beyond the windows. "The Corsairs have sent their first true challenge."
You must stay close and follow my guidance without hesitation.
I will, Leora said, her voice small but steady. She had survived danger before, but now the threat felt heavier, more deliberate.
Eldrick led her to a hidden chamber, one she had glimpsed before but never truly entered. It was a room lined with weapons, scrolls, and strange artifacts whose purpose she could not guess. Candles flickered against the walls, throwing long shadows that danced like spirits. "This is the place where we prepare," Eldrick explained. "The estate is more than walls and servants. It is alive, if you know how to see it. Every shadow, every creak, it can be an ally or a warning." Leora nodded, trying to absorb his words. She had begun to understand that this world was not governed by courage alone. Strategy, attention, and intuition mattered equally, and she had little experience with any of it. Suddenly, a sound came from the courtyard below, a soft shuffle, barely noticeable, yet it sent a jolt through both of them. Eldrick's hand went to the hilt of his sword, his body moving with practiced precision. Leora, though trembling, followed him without question. They reached a balcony overlooking the courtyard. Shadows moved with unnatural fluidity. Figures, masked and silent, slipped across the stone like smoke. The Corsairs had arrived. "Stay behind me," Eldrick whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Watch and learn. Courage is useful, but timing, observation, and patience save lives." The intruders advanced. Eldrick moved like a shadow himself, precise and terrifying in his efficiency. Leora could barely follow, her eyes wide as he neutralized the attackers one by one, not with cruelty, but with calm, measured skill. He fought not as a man fueled by anger, but as someone dancing with a rhythm he alone could hear. And then one of the masked figures lunged directly at Leora. Her instincts flared. She dodged, tripping over the edge of the balcony. Eldrick's hand shot out, steadying her before she could fall. "You are reckless," he said quietly, almost like a teacher chiding a student. "But I will not let fear control you." Leora looked at him, her pulse pounding. I am not afraid," she said, though her voice wavered. "Good," he murmured. "Courage without fear is reckless. Courage with awareness, that is power." The fight ended as quickly as it began. The intruders retreated, leaving behind traces of their intent. A message carved into the stone, faint but unmistakable. "This is only the beginning." He turned to Leora, a rare shadow of vulnerability crossing his features. "You have done well," he said softly. "But this is far from over. Your courage has drawn attention, yes, but it has also made you part of something far larger than you can imagine." Leora nodded, though the weight of his words pressed on her chest. She had always imagined life as small, contained, manageable. Now it was a storm she could not control. Yet she could not walk away. Over the following days, Eldrick began to teach her, not only about courage, but about the delicate power that governed the Dethran family. Every action in the estate, every glance or gesture could carry meaning. Leora learned to read those signs, to anticipate the intentions of allies and enemies alike. And yet, the bond between her and Eldrick deepened in ways that neither of them fully understood. It was subtle, a quiet electricity in their interactions. The shared glances in the halls, the brief moments where he allowed her to see his humanity beneath the mask of power. One evening, as the sky darkened with storm clouds, Seraphine took Leora aside. The matriarch's eyes were solemn, yet there was pride in her gaze. "You are changing him," Seraphine said softly. "Eldrick is strong, but he is also trapped by the weight of his bloodline. Few have ever reached him, and even fewer have challenged him without fear. You are doing both." Leora swallowed, unsure how to respond. I do not want to change him. I only want to survive this storm." "Survival is not enough," Seraphine replied. "You will learn, little one, that sometimes courage must be paired with wisdom, and sometimes hearts are the most dangerous territories of all." That night, Leora returned to her small room, her thoughts a tangle of fear, fascination, and a strange pull toward Eldrick she could not name. The city's lights shimmered through the window, but they offered little comfort. Outside, the shadows were alive, moving with intent and patience. Somewhere in the dark streets, the corsairs were plotting, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The following day, Eldrick requested her presence in the family library. The room was quiet, almost sacred, filled with books that seemed to hum with the weight of centuries. He handed her a scroll. "This," he said, "contains knowledge you must understand. It is not just about defending yourself or others. It is about understanding the unseen, the history, the curses, the alliances that bind us." Leora unrolled the scroll, scanning the ancient symbols and careful writing. Her mind struggled to follow, but she understood the intent. Eldrick was teaching her to see beyond the visible, to perceive the currents beneath the surface of power. "You are learning quickly," he said, a faint edge of pride in his voice. "And yet knowledge without action is useless. You must act wisely, decisively, and sometimes with your heart as well as your mind." She looked at him, noticing the rare softness in his expression. "With my heart?" she whispered. "Death!" he said simply. "Sometimes the heart can be both the strongest weapon and the greatest vulnerability. You must learn to balance both." Their lessons were interrupted that night. A soft knock echoed through the library door. Leora turned, startled, as Eldrick moved to answer it. Outside, a messenger from a distant part of the city awaited, eyes wide with urgency. "The corsairs have made their next move," the messenger said. "They are coming closer. Soon they will strike the estate itself." Eldrick's jaw tightened. He looked at Leora, a silent question in his dark eyes. She nodded, though fear trembled in her chest. She would not run. She would not hide. "Not anymore." That night, the two of them walked the walls of the estate, silent observers of the city that stretched like a living shadow beneath them. Every alley, every roof, every shadow held the possibility of danger, yet Leora felt something she had never felt before. A sense of belonging, of purpose, and even of connection to the man who had once seemed untouchable and cold. "You will not face this alone," Eldrick said quietly. "Nor should you. There is power in partnership, in trust, even in the darkest of places." Leora met his gaze, her heart a mixture of fear and hope. I trust you," she said softly, though the words felt heavy with meaning. Eldrick's hand brushed hers, light and fleeting, yet it carried the weight of unspoken promises. "And I trust you," he replied, voice low, almost inaudible. The storm outside the estate raged, lightning flashing across the sky, illuminating the city in stark silver light. Somewhere in the darkness, the corsairs moved closer, unseen and patient. But inside the walls, courage and trust were growing, quietly, like fire beneath the cold stone. Leora and Eldrick had survived the first wave of danger, but the storm was only beginning. And in the days to come, they would discover not only the strength of their enemies, but the unexpected power of their bond. The storm had arrived. Thunder rolled across the city, rattling windows and shaking the walls of the Dethrine estate. Rain fell in silver sheets, drumming on the rooftops, and the wind carried whispers of threat and challenge from the streets below. Leora stood at the balcony, her cloak clinging to her like a second skin, eyes fixed on the shadow moving against the rain. The corsairs had come. Eldrick appeared beside her, silent and commanding, his dark cloak blowing in the wind. His hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that grounded her trembling heart. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low, almost gentle in contrast to the storm. Leora swallowed, gripping the railing. "I am," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of fear. Fear was no longer weakness. It was the fuel for courage. Below, the enemy scaled the estate walls, swift and precise. Eldrick's guards were ready, but even they could not cover every shadow. Leora had learned much in the past weeks: observation, timing, the unspoken language of power. She now understood that courage without preparation could falter, but courage paired with awareness could change the course of a battle. Eldrick stepped forward, sword drawn, a silhouette of strength against the dark sky. Leora stayed close, her heart beating with a rhythm she could barely name. They moved as one, silent and coordinated, yet the storm outside made every step uncertain. The first intruder leapt over the balcony railing. Eldrick met him with precision, a swift motion that disarmed and neutralized without hesitation. Leora watched, heart in her throat, and then remembered what she had learned. She acted instinctively, throwing a small lamp to distract another masked figure, giving Eldrick the advantage. "You are learning," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "Do not underestimate yourself." The enemy was relentless. Figures moved like shadows, striking with speed and cunning. But Eldrick and Leora were no longer separate. They were a single force, one guided by trust, courage, and unspoken understanding. In the chaos, a masked figure broke through the defenses, heading straight for Leora. She froze, fear flaring in her chest, but then Eldrick appeared, intercepting the intruder with a force that seemed beyond human. Leora's hand instinctively found his arm, steadying herself, their eyes locking in a brief moment of connection that spoke volumes. "You are safe," he said, his voice carrying over the storm. "And you must remember, this is only the beginning. Courage alone will not carry you through every shadow." The battle raged for what felt like hours. Rain-soaked stone became slippery, candlelight flickered wildly, and the storm outside mirrored the storm within the walls. Yet slowly, with each coordinated move, each act of courage, the intruders were pushed back. And then, silence. The storm continued to rage, but the estate was calm. The corsairs had retreated, for now. Leora stood panting, her cloak torn, her hands trembling from exertion. Eldrick approached, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You have done well," he said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are no longer just a maid. You are part of this family, and part of this story. And more than that, you have changed me." Leora blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Changed you?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, his eyes dark and intense. "I have lived in shadows my whole life, guided by fear, duty, and the weight of my family's blood. But you have shown me courage, compassion, and a strength I did not know existed. You have touched something in me that was long buried." Her heart trembled at his words. She had never imagined that her small act of shielding Madame Seraphine would lead to this. Being seen, being acknowledged, being valued by the man who had seemed untouchable and cold. Eldrick lowered his gaze, a rare vulnerability in his expression. "And yet," he continued, "danger is not gone. The corsairs will return! Others may come, and we must be ready, but we will face it together.
Leora felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper she could not name.
Together, she repeated, her voice steady now. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Eldrick and Leora trained, planned, and observed. The estate became a fortress of trust and strategy. Madame Seraphine continued to guide them, offering wisdom that had been honed by years of surviving power and betrayal. Through it all, the bond between Leora and Eldrick deepened. It was subtle, woven through shared glances, quiet instructions, and moments of vulnerability that neither could ignore. Leora began to see past the mask Eldrick wore for the world. She saw the weight of responsibility, the fear of loss, and the rare glimpses of a heart capable of care and love. Eldrick, in turn, began to see her not just as a brave maid, but as a partner, a confidant, someone whose courage complemented his own and whose wisdom could temper his strength. He found himself drawn to her laughter, her curiosity, and the quiet bravery that had first caught his attention. Then came the final test. A stormier night than before, the wind howling, rain lashing against the walls. The corsairs attacked again, this time in greater numbers, more precise, more dangerous. Leora and Eldrick were ready. They moved together like shadows, anticipating each other's movements, trusting instinct and training alike. The battle was fierce. Rain turned the stone floors slick, lightning illuminated fleeting figures, and the sound of swords clashing filled the halls. Leora moved with precision now, guiding others, creating openings, protecting those around her. Eldrick was a force of nature, swift and merciless, yet controlled, every movement calculated.
At the height of the chaos, a masked figure broke through, heading straight for Madame Seraphine. Leora's heart surged. She could not allow harm to come to the woman who had guided her, protected her, and believed in her. She intercepted the intruder, throwing herself between them. Eldrick appeared in an instant, his presence overwhelming and protective. Together they neutralized the threat, a seamless coordination born of trust and courage. The corsairs, seeing their efforts fail, retreated into the storm, leaving the estate battered but intact. Breathing heavily, Leora and Eldrick stood together in the grand hall. Rain streamed in through broken windows, lightning cast jagged shadows, and the city beyond trembled under the storm. Yet inside, they were safe. For the first time, Leora felt the weight of victory and the quiet strength of belonging. "You were incredible!" Eldrick said, voice low but full of admiration. His hand brushed hers, lingering. "I should have doubted you, but I did not see your strength, your courage. You have earned more than survival. You have earned respect, trust, and something even I struggle to name." Leora met his gaze, feeling warmth spread through her chest.
I only acted because it was right,"
she said softly.
"I didn't know I would change anything. You have changed much," he said. "Not just in me, but in the family, the estate, even the city. You have reminded us all that courage, loyalty, and love are stronger than fear, stronger than power alone." The storm outside began to abate, leaving a soft silver glow over the city. Leora and Eldrick stood together, rain dripping from their hair and clothes, the night still alive with whispers of danger and the promise of future trials. But for now, they had survived. And they had survived together. Madame Seraphine approached, her eyes bright with pride. "You have proven yourself," she said to Leora. "Not just with bravery, but with heart. And Eldrick, you have learned to see what is truly powerful, courage, loyalty, and the bond between two people who trust one another." Eldrick nodded, placing a hand on Leora's shoulder. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The city, the world, there will always be shadows. But now we face them as allies, as partners, as something more than we were yesterday." Leora felt her chest swell. For the first time, she understood. Courage was not only standing against danger, it was standing with someone who trusted you, who needed you, and who saw your worth even when the world tried to ignore it.
The city slept under a silver sky, quiet for the moment. Somewhere beyond the walls, shadows moved and whispered, plotting for the future. But inside the Dethrine estate, a new strength had been forged.
Not just in the walls, the guards, or the strategies, but in hearts brave enough to face fear, dark enough to understand danger, and loyal enough to protect one another.
Eldrick turned to Leora, his eyes softening. No longer the unreadable mask of power, but the gaze of a man who had seen the value of courage and the depth of trust. "You have shielded more than my mother," he said quietly.
You have shielded me. From the darkness I thought I could never escape. And for that, I am grateful.
Leora looked at him, her own eyes reflecting the storm outside and the calm she felt within. "And I," she said softly, "will always stand by you, whatever comes." The first light of dawn crept through the clouds, silver and golden, casting the city in a new glow. The storm had passed, but the echoes of courage, trust, and the bond between two unlikely hearts would linger far longer. And so the poor maid, who had once merely shielded a hand from a slap, became the heart of a story that would be whispered in the city streets for generations. A story of courage, loyalty, and a love that had grown quietly like fire beneath the shadows. The Dethrine estate and the city beyond had survived the night, and Leora and Eldrick had survived themselves, together, stronger, and ready for whatever storms the future might bring.